In the dense, unforgiving jungles of Southeast Asia, where monsoon rains fall like knives and the earth remembers every scream buried beneath its soil, a new chapter in the legend of John Rambo begins. 20 years have passed since the events of Afghanistan. The world has changed, nations have shifted, wars have evolved, but Rambo remains the same. A man carrying the weight of silent battles, wandering through life like a ghost looking for a place to rest. Deep in the borderlands of Thailand, far from the noise of civilization, Rambo has carved out a lonely existence. He captures snakes for local traders, repairs old boats, and avoids human contact with a ferocity only a wounded soul understands. The scars on his body are old, but the ones on his spirit remain fresh. He carries no flag, no allegiances, no expectations, only memories that haunt like shadows. Yet the world has a way of seeking out men like Rambo. Violence finds him even when he runs from it. And on one quiet day by the river, a group of Christian missionaries arrives, requesting his help to transport them into Burma, a land drowning in one of the most brutal humanitarian crises of the modern era. The country, under a ruthless military dictatorship, has become a prison where innocent villagers live in constant fear of massacre, torture, and starvation. The missionaries want to bring medicine and hope. Rambo warns them that hope dies easily in places like Burma. But their resolve is unshakable, and destiny calls once more. Reluctantly, he pilots them into a land where cruelty grows like weeds. The setting shifts dramatically from the desert warfare of the previous films. This story lives in mud, blood, and raw human anguish. Burma's civil conflict becomes the backdrop for one of the most uncompromising action films ever created. Sylvester Stallone, not only returning as Rambo, but also stepping behind the camera as director, shapes a world where violence is not glorified, but shown in its most brutal reality. Unlike the explosive heroics of the 1980s, this film is grounded, darker, and deeply human. Rambo is no longer the mythic warrior fighting for symbolic ideals. He's a broken man trying to remain invisible until innocence forces him to step forward again. Production of the film embraced this rawness. Shot in Thailand with some sequences filmed near the border where real Burmese refugees lived, the crew encountered landscapes scarred by real conflict. Stallone wanted authenticity, not Hollywood polish. He sought a visual language that screamed of suffering: scorched huts, mass graves, rain-soaked jungles, mud-caked villages. The decision to portray war with uncomfortable realism sparked global conversation. For some nations, the film was too graphic. Burma banned it immediately. But reports emerged that underground groups began using bootleg copies as motivation for resistance. The movie, unintentionally, became a symbol of rebellion. In narrative terms, part one of this story builds slowly, acknowledging the internal decay of a man who has tried to hide from violence, yet finds that violence shapes every corner of his life. Rambo's face carries the heaviness of decades, not the sculpted hero of the 1980s, but an older, harder, more haunted warrior. Age has not softened him, it has sharpened him in different ways. His body thickened with years of hardship, his voice graveled by silence, his eyes drained of hope. Stallone intentionally portrayed Rambo not as a spectacle, but as a scarred relic of endless conflict. When the missionaries disappear during a massacre by the Burmese army, Rambo is confronted with a truth he cannot escape. Some wars hunt you down. The cruelty he witnesses reignites the flame buried deep within him. Alone in the darkness, he must decide what he has avoided for decades, whether he will once again embrace the violence that lives within his bones. The moral conflict becomes the emotional foundation of the film. Rambo is not the hero who runs toward battle. He's the man who desperately wishes to stay away, yet cannot. Production challenges were intense. Thailand's brutal weather caused frequent delays. Floods washed away film equipment. Stallone himself suffered minor injuries during stunts. But the dedication to authenticity remained unwavering. The violence depicted, from landmine explosions to the atrocities against villagers, was created with unmatched practical effects. making Rambo 2008 one of the most viscerally realistic war films of its time. Critics later noted its unrelenting brutality, calling it shockingly real and uncomfortably true to life. When the film premiered in January 2008, audiences encountered a Rambo unlike the previous incarnations. This was not the one-man army of exaggerated action. This was a man whose rage was not heroic, but primal. The film's tone was darker, its pacing heavier, its emotional core deeper. It carried the trauma of a man who has witnessed humanity at its worst, and knows peace is a lie a world tells itself. Financially, the film was a success relative to its budget. With approximately $50 million in production costs, it earned over $113 million worldwide, fueled by strong international reception and home media sales. Fans praised the film's return to gritty realism, and word of mouth elevated it beyond expectations. Video on demand, DVD, and Blu-ray sales were massive, making it one of the most rented action titles of 2008. Critics' reception was mixed, but more favorable than Rambo 3. Many critics respected its raw portrayal of war and its refusal to romanticize violence. Others criticized it for being too graphic. Yet the film accomplished what Stallone intended, to show war as a nightmare rather than a spectacle. Awards recognition came mostly from action-oriented festivals, praising its direction, stunts, and sound design. The movie was also celebrated by military communities for its unapologetic depiction of real conflict zones. But the true power of Rambo 2008 lies not in its numbers or accolades, but in the emotional rebuilding of the character. In the quiet moments, as rain falls on bamboo rooftops and firelight flickers across Rambo's worn face, the audience sees a man confronting his past. Every memory of Vietnam, Afghanistan, and every forgotten battlefield presses on him. A lifetime of violence culminating in a single choice: remain in hiding or unleash the storm again. Part 1 sets the stage for the inevitable. The missionaries are missing. The Burmese army is slaughtering innocents without mercy. And deep inside Rambo, a dormant beast begins to awaken. Not driven by revenge, not by patriotism, but by the simple, painful truth that someone must stand between the helpless and the monsters. As the jungle hums with distant thunder, Rambo forges a path toward a war he never wanted. The knife returns to his hand, the bow is reforged. The past breathes again. Because in a world drowning in darkness, some men are born not to escape war, but to end it, even if it destroys them in the process.
The world that John Rambo walks through now feels older, heavier, and more brutally honest than anything he faced in the past. Years have passed since the battles that carved themselves into his memory, and the quiet isolation he chose in Thailand has shaped him into a man who no longer expects anything from life except survival. Yet even as he tries to disappear into the rhythm of solitude, the world refuses to let a soldier like him fade. His path takes a sharp turn when the consequences of violence, far beyond his choosing, begin to spill across borders, lands, and the fragile seams of hope that people cling to. What begins as a simple decision to help others becomes another descent into a conflict where cruelty operates with no restraints, and where the cost of humanity is measured in survival, not victory. The collapse of safety in the region becomes apparent long before any rescue mission begins. Rambo's understanding of warfare, trauma, and the harsh reality of human nature gives him a grim clarity that others lack. He recognizes that there are places where rules don't apply, where suffering is not an accident but a weapon, and where entire villages exist at the mercy of forces that thrive on fear. As he moves deeper into this reality, the contrast between his internal battle and the chaos around him grows sharper. He is no longer fighting for a nation, an ideology, or even redemption. He is fighting because allowing atrocities to continue unchallenged would be a greater burden than returning to violence. Throughout this chapter of his life, the consequences of intervention cut deeper than any wound. Every step forward reveals not only the brutality inflicted by those who abuse power, but also the resilience of people who refuse to surrender their humanity despite overwhelming force. Rambo finds himself standing at the crossroads between the man he tried to forget and the warrior he can never truly escape. The weight of that tension becomes a driving force, shaping his actions and decisions as he pushes onward into a conflict that few outsiders have ever survived. As the narrative unfolds, the emotional undercurrent of the story becomes intertwined with the physical danger surrounding him. Rambo's instinct, sharpened by decades of experience, allows him to sense the gravity of what awaits him long before the mission reaches its climax. Each moment he spends among those he's trying to protect creates a connection that challenges his long-held belief that he is incapable of belonging anywhere. Their vulnerability clashes with his hardened exterior, forcing him to confront a part of himself he has long tried to bury. The film's progression captures the transformation of a man who operates with a sense of purpose forged from a lifetime of struggle. The deeper he moves into hostile territory, the more apparent it becomes that he is not merely fighting enemies, he is fighting the very idea that suffering should be accepted as an unchangeable reality. The mission becomes symbolic of something larger, something tied to the echo of all the battles he fought before. With every encounter, every confrontation, and every decision, his internal monologue shifts from resignation to determination, pulling him further into the heart of a conflict that demands absolute resolve. The film's presentation of violence is unfiltered, raw, and starkly grounded in the environment that produced it. The brutality is not portrayed as spectacle, but as a reflection of the world Rambo has stepped into. The contrast between his precise, survival-based actions and the senseless cruelty of the antagonists emphasizes the difference between necessity and oppression. Even as the intensity rises, the film stays anchored in the emotional foundation of its protagonist, his silence, his endurance, and his awareness of how each action contributes to the evolving weight he carries. By the time the narrative reaches its most intense sequences, the focus shifts toward the inevitable collision between Rambo's internal resistance and the external forces pushing him into full combat. The deeper he ventures, the more undeniable it becomes that there is no path forward except confronting the violence head-on. The mission turns into something far more personal than a rescue. It becomes an act of defiance against the darkness that has engulfed the region and a recognition that some battles, no matter how costly, must be fought because the alternative is allowing cruelty to continue unchallenged. The film's overall impact is heightened through the journey of its protagonist, whose motivations evolve as the story progresses. Rather than glorifying conflict, the narrative presents a reflection on the nature of violence, the burden of survival, and the struggle to maintain humanity while confronting the most inhumane conditions imaginable. Rambo's return to action is portrayed as a reluctant but necessary choice, one informed not by vengeance but by responsibility, and an understanding that in a world ruled by merciless brutality, silence is its own kind of violence. As the film approaches its conclusion, the transformation within Rambo becomes clear. The journey is not merely physical, but deeply emotional, bridging the gap between the life he has lived and the future he never believed he deserved. The aftermath of the mission leaves behind a landscape scarred by conflict, but marked by a sense of restored dignity for those he rescued. His actions, though drenched in the harsh reality of warfare, serve as a reminder that even in the darkest environments, the will to protect can survive. After the chaos settles, the narrative shifts its tone toward reflection, placing emphasis on the emotional dust that follows violent storms. For Rambo, the path ahead remains uncertain, but something shifts within him, an acknowledgement that his story has not reached its end and that the identity he tried for so long to abandon may still have purpose beyond destruction. The final moments guide him toward a place he has avoided for decades, the idea of home, or at least the possibility of it. His journey closes not with victory, but with a quiet sense of direction. The film earned attention for its uncompromising realism and its portrayal of conflict in Burma, bringing global awareness to real-world atrocities happening in the region. With a worldwide earning of over $113 million, it revived the franchise and reaffirmed the cultural impact of its central figure. While not heavily decorated with awards, the film received recognition for its intense portrayal of modern conflict and its bold depiction of humanitarian issues. It remains notable for using the backdrop of real geopolitical suffering to create a narrative that blends action with social commentary, ensuring the film stands out as more than just another entry in an action series. In conclusion, this chapter in the franchise serves as a powerful portrayal of a man confronting not only enemies, but the echoes of his own past. The film's narrative reinforces that heroism is not defined by glory, but by enduring pain and making the difficult choice to stand against oppression. Throughout its unfiltered depiction of violence, its emotionally grounded journey, and its reflection on survival, the story of Rambo continues to evolve. This installment becomes a symbol of how even the most hardened soul can rediscover purpose. And as Rambo takes his final, quiet steps toward the place he once called home, the story leaves a lingering message. Some battles shape the world, but others shape the man who survives them.